afternoon. My name is Elizabeth McFadden. I teach at the Institute of Notre Dame in Baltimore, Maryland, and I created a lesson for high school students. So I titled my lesson, Where Are We Now? Adams, Jefferson, and the Legacy of 1776. In many ways, my lesson is quite simple. I would say it's more of an Adams peace field than a Jefferson Monticello, but there are a couple of reasons for that. As a new teacher, so I'll be going into my third year of teaching, one of the things I was looking to do was create something that another new teacher who was very busy, perhaps taking classes and doing other things outside of school, would be able to get a lesson that they could just download and implement right away, even if it was just a few minutes before class started. Not that I'm speaking from experience, but just in case, the night before there was a little stress, it would be something that could be implemented. I also focused on using primary sources, and that's because, there are two reasons for that. The first is that with my students, I found that many of them they find it very empowering to use primary sources. For some of them that I've had in the past, it's the first time that they've had the ability to do that. And I think for those of us in the room, this is something that we often do a lot. I mean, we're used to doing these. We love history. We're very passionate about our subject. But I also think that there are some teachers out there for whom using primary sources and working with primary documents is scary for them. And so I wanted to create a lesson that would be easy for them to implement, that could kind of get them in and see both how empowering it is for the students, but also the teachers. So those are just some of my goals and my rationale for creating this lesson. So one of the things I've been thinking about is just among my own students and kind of conversations with colleagues, is that students almost feel as if the Declaration of Independence, the Constitution, many of our kind of big major documents and events, that they were almost inevitable, that they were kind of brought down from heaven. I teach at a Catholic school, so I kind of get the sense of the Ten Commandments, like, Thomas Jefferson hiked up to the top of Monticello and he brought down this tablet and it was great and everyone was so excited. They really struggle with kind of grasping some of the concepts about the turmoil and the kind of anxieties faced by not just our early presidents and legislators, but even our presidents and legislators, our leaders today. So I wanted to kind of find a way to take the history and get them to start thinking about kind of make connections to contemporary period. So in terms of my objectives, they're written up here. So students will be comparing and contrasting primary source documents, because we love them in our class. Thinking about how to analyze a primary source document. So the importance of audience, the effects of time, and I'll explain that a little bit more in just a moment. And comparing both the feelings of Adams and Jefferson. They're both very different people. They have very different backgrounds. And we're going to be analyzing their documents as they change and as they age and as their lives, they've gone through different life events. So kind of thinking about that and the effects that might have. And so ultimately they're answering the questions, are there fears and hopes for the future? Are they ultimately realized today? And this is something I would use with my government students to kind of build upon their knowledge of the past and bring it into a contemporary environment. So a lot of this is discussion-based in addition to the primary sources, and I'm not going to go through the entire discussion just for the sake of time. But one of the things that I decided to start with is this quote here. It's no two men now live, fellow citizens. Perhaps it may be doubted whether any two men have ever lived, who, more than those we now commemorate, have impressed their own sentiments in regard to politics and government on mankind, infused their own opinions more deeply into the opinions of others, or given a more lasting direction to the current of human thought. Their work doth not perish with them. No age will come in which the American Revolution will appear less than it is, as one of the greatest events in human history. No age will come in which it will cease to be seen and felt on either continent that a mighty step, a great advance, not only in American affairs, but in human affairs, was made on the 4th of July, 1776. So this was said by Daniel Webster on August 2nd, 1826. And he spoke these words in Faneuil Hall. It was the same room where many of the people who were gathered would have heard just less than a month earlier about the death of both Jefferson and John Adams. Many of them kind of went in to celebrate the 4th of July and left hearing about the death of Adams. So I would kind of start off with this quote because he doesn't do much to kind of make us think that the triumph of July 4th and this kind of these revolutionary ideas was not an inevitable outcome. And so kind of just to warm up students and get them to start thinking about that and doing a little math activity, getting them to think about how much time had passed between Webster's speech and the events that took place in 1776, just to kind of see. One of the other things that we start talking about in the discussion, engaging students in what was going on while Webster's up giving that speech. What was he saying? Is that actually true based on some of the things that we know very much about, but students might need some refresher. So then we have two sets of letters that I've created, and I found these excerpts in the collected letters of John Adams and Thomas Jefferson. So what they'll do is the students will analyze two letters from 1777 between Adams and Jefferson, and where they talk about, in some ways they're very positive and very hopeful, but you also get a sense about their anxieties. They talk about issues of representation. The idea of one group overpowering another in terms of the sizes of the colonies and things like that. Hopefully the students will be familiar. I have put some background information in it, but of course in a government class, the assumption is they've already had the U.S. history background, so a lot of this might be kind of a refresher for them. In the second set of letters, what I've done is I found two letters that are actually, they're written in 1821, so just a few years before both men died, but they are bringing up much of the same anxieties. John Adams and Thomas Jefferson wrote a lot about this. They looked out at current issues within their government. And a lot of their letters, it's actually really interesting to read their older letters and their, I guess, more recent letters, the letters later on in their lives, because they're remarkably similar. And so students would have an opportunity to kind of read and see, well, gosh, not much really changed in the intervening years. And I've provided some graphic organizers to help the students with this. Again, also mainly to help the teachers, because for many of them, like I said, it's like preaching to the choir here. But for teachers who are nervous about kind of tackling the primary sources, I wanted something that would be easy for them to follow and also get them to do things like sourcing with their students and contextualizing, and then getting them to think like an historian. And then finally, in order to kind of bring it to contemporary, so I have some discussion questions on the website for teachers, again, which I won't get into. But one thing that they do is they go back to that original quote and they start thinking about us today living about 188 years, if my math's all right, after that quote from Daniel Webster. So looking out into our nation and our world, and do we see some of the same issues that Jefferson and Adams had been writing about. And for most of us, I think we can say yes, actually. Don't tell your students this, but yes, many of these issues we're still grappling with. And so what I would do is ask students to write a letter to the Jefferson and Adams, and thinking about, were they justified in these fears and hopes, thinking about contemporary examples of where their hopes have been realized, and where some of their fears are some things that we still grapple with today. So that's something that they could do as a homework assignment if more time is necessary. And also I think one of the things that we struggle with, and I'm sure I struggle with, and maybe you do as well, is getting students to have an interest in current events. Kind of building it into the classroom in a natural way so that when you say an example, they actually know what it is. So this was just kind of a way to get them to start thinking about what's going on in the world around them. What I also wanted to do, because when Melanie first talked about these presentations, We talk about the lesson, but I also wanted just to share a few things that, so I gave the lesson, but things that I'm taking with me, because this has been the most wonderful week that I've had in a long time. I've been calling it my vacation, my retreat. So one of the things that I'm very fortunate, having been able to do this with all of you, and some of the things that we'll be able to take away with our classrooms, are the hands-on experiences that we've had. I mean, we were talking in the interview about the winnowing of the seeds, but being able to bring those things into the classroom and share that with my students. Not that I'm going to have my students winnow seeds.
You should.
I could. Now I have to get the lettuce.
That's true.
But being able to kind of take that experience about what it would have been like, because that was someone's job, and being able to kind of bring that in and say, well, there are all different people on these plantations and in this context. Also the connections. One of the things that was invaluable to me, and as you all know, was that tour with Aaron, where he connected my two favorite men, Hadrian and Jefferson. But those kinds of connections that we were only able to make here, that I would never have made that connection if I hadn't been on that tour or at the library. Obviously, the opportunity to read and research here has been just an invaluable experience, and being able to read the letters. And in fact, while I was sitting in that room, I had come to the part where Adams and Jefferson were writing to each other about the founding of UVA, and Adams was congratulating him, but chastising him for not finding enough American professors, which I thought was, because there was somebody talking about that, what are the odds of this happening while I'm in this room? And most especially, I'm most grateful for the opportunity to work with all of you, because the collaboration, all of you have been so helpful, and I'm so grateful for this opportunity. So thank you for listening, and thank you all.
Thank you.